In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you some ways to make a time-lapse photo from a number of digital photographs. The first thing we want to do is open all of those digital photographs, and I have 12 photos that I'd like to composite together. So to make this go a little bit faster, I'd like to open them as layers in one file as opposed to opening 12 individual files. Photoshop has a way to automate that under the File menu, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and then if you have all of your files in one folder, you can just click on the folder and select that folder. Mine happen to be in a folder with other images, so I will just choose Files, Browse, click the top image, hold my Shift key, click the bottom image, Open. You can try, if your files are different sizes or a little bit misaligned, you could try to attempt to automatically align source images. I'm not going to do that. And say OK. And it'll take a little time for this to load. But once it finishes loading, you should now have one Photoshop file that has all of your images as layers. You can turn off the layers to reveal the image below. This would be a great time to save your file with a new name, and you want to make sure to save using the PSD file type, the Photoshop file type, and that'll guarantee that your layers and all of your functionality is preserved. Make sure layers is checked. You want to save your layers, and go ahead and click Save. The easiest way to create the time lapse, which doesn't produce the best result, but it's efficient, is to start at the bottom and turn on one layer at a time and change the opacity of the layer on top. So in this case, I'm going to try changing the opacity to 30%, and now you can see that we're seeing both the layer below and the new layer simultaneously. You can do some simple modifications to align things. In this case, you can use your arrow tools to nudge it into place. I might use these bricks or the locker to make sure that I'm getting things fairly close. Turn on the next layer, adjust my opacity, and then do the same thing. Use my nudge key to align the lockers. If you did a better job taking your photographs than I did, you might not need to do that. Again, the next layer, 30%, and then nudge it into place. If you continue in that manner, what you will end up with is a file that looks something like this. And as you can see, it's not the best quality, it's not the most legible file, so I'd like to show you some other things you can do. One of the other things I'd like to show you is in your layer blending modes. Normal mode means one layer just sits on top of another layer. The two that I use the most often are normal and multiply, and what multiply does is it actually will darken things based on the layers below. So it literally multiplies the pixels. Instead of just one pixel on top of another, now the pixel on top understands the pixel below, and it's multiplying those values. So you often get a darker, richer image. So I could change these to multiply, and you can see how it darkens. So you could go ahead, continue on, adjusting the opacity of each of those layers, potentially changing the layer blending mode to multiply, and you'll get something that looks like this. It's a little difficult to read. What I'd like to show you is another method where we actually just keep one background and we cut out the dugs. So we basically have one background with lots of layers of dugs, and to do that we'll use something called a mask, a layer mask. This shows you what a layer mask is. Essentially, if this is your layer in Photoshop, we can cut out around the part that we'd like to keep and apply this mask over the top of that layer so we're not deleting any pixels, which is really important. In Photoshop, remember, it's difficult to undo, so you want to be careful about getting rid of stuff, getting rid of information that you might later need. This mask just covers up that portion of the layer and allows another portion of the layer to be revealed. Just working with one layer now, turn on one of your layers. The first thing we need to do is make a selection. And that selection, we're going to basically trace the outline of the figure so that we can put a mask around it. You can use any of your selection tools, your lasso, polygonal lasso, or magnetic lasso. I'm a big fan of the polygonal lasso tool, but in the latest releases the magnetic lasso tool also works really well. I'm using Command or Control and the plus key to zoom in. I'll use the space bar and left mouse click to pan on the fly. So let's go ahead with the magnetic lasso tool. You click to start, and I just drag my mouse. I'm not clicking. I just drag my mouse along the edge, and it's detecting contrast, and you can see that it's creating a boundary. If it selects something that you don't want, don't panic. Just keep going. I'll show you how to fix that after you finish making the entire selection. Also, if you think that there's a place where it might have trouble detecting contrast, go ahead and click. You can use clicks within the magnetic lasso tool, and then once you get back to an area where there's a clearly defined boundary, you can continue just by dragging your mouse around that edge. Here I'm going to put a couple of clicks. That boundary is a little fuzzy. This is also a pretty fuzzy boundary. I've just completed my selection by clicking the last point of where my starting point, and you can see I now have the marching ants around the profile. There are a couple of little places where I happen to remember that it got off. So I'm going to zoom in and now choose my polygonal lasso tool, and if you recall that if I hold down the Shift key, you can see a plus sign appears next to my cursor. If I hold down the Option or Alt key, a minus sign appears. So I've selected Doug. Doug is the selection. So here I want to subtract this little bit of great. So I'm going to hit down the Alt key and then draw a selection that includes that and subtract that. You can get pretty anal with this if you want to, but it may not be necessary for this particular assignment. Looks like I cut off one of his fingers there, so I'm going to hit the Shift key. Shouldn't make those kind of jokes for somebody who works in the shop. Here's another subtraction. And maybe one more subtraction here. Okay. You can save your selections. Sometimes you put a lot of work into these selections and so you don't want to lose them, and that's under Select, Save Selection. Since I'm on layer 8, I'm going to save this selection as Doug 8. I'll create a new channel, so New, and say OK. And what that's done is it's now in my channels palette. There's my selection. So if for any reason I deselected by going Select, Deselect, if I needed to get that selection back, now it's saved here in my channels, and I can drag that layer down to the marching ants icon and reselect it. Now I'd like to turn that into a mask so that I'm essentially doing this, right? I want to put this mask over layer 8. With layer 8 selected, I go Layer, Layer Mask. In this case, my selection is Doug, so I would like to reveal my selection and hide everything else. And now you can see I have all my other layers turned off, so now you can see that I have just that figure there, but those other pixels have not been deleted, they still exist. By holding the Shift key, I can click on my layer mask to turn it off, hold the Shift key, click on my layer mask to turn it back on, and you'll see that those pixels still exist. If you want to make a minor edit, or a major edit, I suppose, to a mask, you can hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the mask, and only the mask will be revealed to you. So you can actually zoom in and make modifications to the mask itself using your paintbrush and your eraser tools. So right now I'm painting with white. White meaning something's revealed, black meaning it's hidden. I can change these. I guess I want the hardness to be moved up. So you can actually make modifications directly to the mask, the layer mask, and then I just click on the layer itself to move back into the regular viewing mode. Masks work in grayscale, black and white. They do recognize grays. If I were to put a portion on this mask and I were to fill it with 50% gray and then return, you can see that the mask understands transparency, so it's allowing 50% opacity from the image behind. I'm going to go ahead and undo that in my history palette. I don't really want that. And deselect, hitting Control D. So you could essentially select all of the figures in each layer, and now you can see that I have layer 8 over the background layer, so I only have the background appearing once. I can put this Doug into the appropriate position. And what you will get is an image that looks something like this. This is all of the Dougs with layer masks, but you'll notice here that the layer type is set to multiply, which is why we're getting this weird kind of X-ray view. But you can see that this image, the Dougs are much more clear than in the original version. The last one I want to show you, this one was created by changing the layer blending mode between various layers, so every other layer was changed to screen instead of multiply, which provides some contrast and some legibility within the image. So you can play around a combination of opacities and layer blending modes and layer masks in order to create your time-lapse photo. And that's the end of this video.